For most of the early history of the United States, it basically had no immigration laws.
Okay, so this is a straight up lie. And I'm going to assume, being that he's a history teacher or social studies teacher or whatever, that this is a willful lie and not just some sort of happy ignorance. One of the first things the United States government did after the founding was the Naturalization Act of 1790, which dealt with immigration and citizenship. And then again, 5 years later, the 1795 Naturalization Act, and then the 1798 Naturalization Act, and then the Naturalization Law of 1802, all of which had and kept the stipulation that immigrants be free white persons of good character, i.e. those who are compatible with the society we had established here. And there were numerous immigration laws after this one as well that I'm not going to detail here. They're freely available for anybody who wants to look them up. And for those of you who are going to simp for Mr. Beat, no, he's also not referring to the time period before the founding of the United States, because British law dealt with the same thing. There was nationality law in the American colonies before the founding of the United States, as well as the Plantation Act of 1740, on which the Naturalization Act of 1790 was based. So you're wrong there too.
Borders were open, and anyone who could afford the boat ticket could enter the country.
Again, this is just a straight up lie. That's not true. And it's easily verifiable and just demonstrably false.
That all began to change in the late 1800s when the first major immigration laws were passed to exclude criminals, poor folks, and those classified as, quote, lunatics or, quote, idiots. Then, of course, there was the infamous Chinese Exclusion Act, which went into effect on May 6, 1882, which banned Chinese workers. The Chinese Exclusion Act was actually the only law to prevent all members of a specific ethnic or national group from immigrating to the United States.
Not that it really matters, but I know people from China who would take issue with the notion that it's entirely one ethnic group there. And these exclusions make sense. Do you want idiots and lunatics and the destitute showing up on your doorstep? No, you don't. Furthermore, if you've got millions of workers being imported from a specific region and it's undercutting the local labor force, yeah, it makes sense as a matter of practicality, if you're at all interested in protecting the American people and the American worker, to put a stop to that. There's a reason labor unions in this country and Bernie Sanders, up until very, very recently, were strongly and staunchly against mass immigration, especially illegal immigration, because it's undercutting American labor and costing those who were born here and whose parents were born here and whose grandparents were born here a higher quality of life.
Still, most immigrants could easily enter the country, and that's why so many came in the late 1800s. It wasn't until immigrants started coming from Southern and Eastern Europe in mass numbers that Americans started freaking out.
Yes, because those people were not compatible with society here. People saw the effects of mass immigration and how they potentially stood to lose control of their own nations and demanded action. And in response to the will of the people, something Congress no longer does, Congress acted. Though, again, the notion that people didn't take issue with immigration until this point in time is just plain not true.
In the 1920s, the U.S. government began quotas on immigration, prioritizing Northern and Western Europeans over other groups.
Oh, the absolute injustice of a people wanting to retain control of their own nation. Good Lord.
Between the 1920s and 1950s, residents of only 3 countries, Ireland, Germany, and the United Kingdom, got nearly 70% of the quota visas available to enter the U.S., and immigration dropped to some of the lowest levels we have ever seen in American history. The U.S. government turned down millions, like the Jewish refugees who fled Nazi Germany in the years right before and during World War II. Many later ended up dying during the Holocaust.
Take a moment and reflect on the absolute sophistry here. The subtext here is that the United States somehow bears responsibility for the Holocaust because they didn't import hordes of Eastern Europeans in the 30s, drawing parallels between wanting some semblance of an immigration policy and being a cartoon supervillain. And I'd rather not unpack it here because it's just not relevant to the conversation at large, but the United States did allow in a tremendous number of refugees from Eastern Europe, including Jews in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. So I guess America bad for not taking in all the Jews, some of whom probably did not want to leave their home countries. And also, if you want immigration law and control over your own nations, you're responsible for the next Holocaust. What a clown this guy is. I can't believe he's allowed in a classroom.
In 1965, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, which made immigration more fair and open.
Fair and open to whom? Certainly not the American people.
It undid the preference for Northern Europe, putting all countries on a level playing field, and opened up immigration to the rest of the world. This is still the system the country has today.
And look what's become of this country. We're no longer a nation. We're no longer homogenous. We no longer have any sort of shared values. People can't even articulate what it means to be American anymore. We've become nothing more than an economic zone, a hotel, as it were, where people are just staying. People don't even speak the same language here anymore, whose sole purpose, whose sole unifying identity is to consume the next product, to work for poverty wages, to be financially unable to own anything. The 1965 Immigration Act making it more open and fair. You want to talk about open and fair? Take a look at what happened when you opened the gates to our country to the barbarian hordes. It isn't mere coincidence that all this stuff started getting bad in 1965. According to the Pew Research Center, in 1960, 70% of households only had the father employed. As is healthiest for the children and the family unit, the mother was financially able to not work and to stay at home and take care of the children and the household. A sharp decline in this number clearly takes place in roughly 1965 after the borders have been thrown open. By the time 2012 rolled around, the increase in labor competition had driven real wages down so far that the percentage of households only having the father employed plummeted to 31% and is probably lower now. Now, the most damning evidence of this economic catastrophe that was the 1965 Immigration Act, let's take a look at real median household income. Using the Census Department's own data, the median household income in 1967, shortly after the 1965 Immigration Act, is just over $50,000 a year. Now, mind you, most households only had the father working at this point in time. I also have reason to think that this number is a little low, just because when I take the Census Bureau's own data that was published in 1960 or so, and I plug it into an inflation calculator, the number I get is around 63,000. But I'm not here to split hairs because the point still stands. By the time 2021 rolls around, where most households have two incomes, the median income is $70,000 a year. Meaning the increase we have seen in median household income from 1967 to effectively today does not match up with the fact that most households have two people working now. This is indicative of a massive pay cut for American households since the 1965 Immigration Act. More concerningly, after the 1965 Immigration Act, homicide rates skyrocketed. National violent crime rates skyrocketed. And that trend continues into the modern day, almost in direct proportion to the number of illegal immigrants we have in this country, and certainly correlates with the number of total foreign-born persons in this country. And the demographic makeup of this nation follows a similar trend. The United States has maintained a white population, that is, white non-Hispanic population, somewhere in the 80% range. In 1965, this begins to shift to the point that the U.S. Census is predicting that the United States will have a minority white population by 2045, meaning the culture of this nation and its founding stock have been destroyed. And this is without delving into the correlation between race and IQ, which I won't get into here, mostly because others have already done it better. If you're looking for fantastic information on that, I would encourage you to read the bell curve and watch some of the alternative hypothesis videos. I will, however, comment on the fact that these virtually unprecedented levels of immigration, these nation-changing levels of immigration, have radically eroded the sovereignty and the political power of founding stock Americans. Political belief and party affiliation align very strongly with racial background, being that throughout American history, in most cases, elections have been decided by a handful of percentage points. Even minute changes to the demographic makeup of the country would decide the political course that country takes and who holds the reins of power in hand. And the racial makeup of this country has been radically altered since the 1965 Immigration Act.
176 different languages are spoken among students in the New York City school system.
Did you know that there are at least 430 languages actively spoken in the United States?
I'm not entirely sure what you're driving at here, pal. I think that's kind of their point.
167 of those are Native American languages. The United States has no official language, and there has always been language diversity within the United States.
The reasoning behind why the United States did not adopt a national language at the outset is more nuanced than Lamau, the founders wanted us to be a nation that wasn't a nation. There's a reason that all the founding documents were written and published in English. There's a reason that the de facto national language has always been English. I think Teddy Roosevelt said it best in 1907 when he said, "We have room for but one language in this country, and that is the English language. For we intend to see that the crucible turns our people out as Americans, of American nationality, and not as dwellers in a polyglot boarding house." And that's what mass immigration has turned us into. A polyglot boarding house. A state without a nation. A mere economic zone, whose people have no sense of national pride, what it means to be an American, or a sort of extended kinship, a relationship with their neighbors. Now, I have much more to say on this topic, but this video is already getting rather long, so I'm going to break it off here so that the content might be a little more digestible. Until next time, I'm Jim Dewey with Combating the Narrative.